Hello guys, today I'll be doing a discography review for the band Fate's Warning, and this is one of the pioneers of progressive metal and kind of an underrated band too. Not talked about as much as bands like Queensryche or Dream Theater, but a band that I think certainly deserves more attention, more credit. But yeah, and I think they have some pretty strong releases in their discography. But anyways, let's go ahead and dive into this discography. And with these discography reviews, I don't go super in depth, but I just give my thoughts on each album and just go from there. But anyways, it all started with this album, Night on Brocken. And I'll be honest, not the strongest debut. I mean, and also you can really hear their influences in the album, but some of my favorites, Buried Alive, Kiss of Death. I like the title track, but yeah, I don't return to this album very much, to be honest. But overall, a decent debut, just in my opinion, probably not one of their best. Then the band, in my opinion, really steps it up with this album, The Spectre Within. And some of my favorites on here, Traveler in Time, Orphan Gypsy, and Epitaph. Those are probably my favorites on here, but in my opinion, the songwriting is a bit stronger than compared to the debut, and I think the songs go in more interesting directions compared to the debut. But yeah, overall, pretty good album. Then you move on to the album that I think is the best of the John Arch era, and also at the same time one of Fate's Warning's best. That is Awaken the Guardian. So yeah, some of my favorites: The Sorceress, Valley of the Dolls, Guardian, and Exodus. And yeah, overall really strong album. And also, yeah, in my opinion, there are some songs on here that really show how great their rhythm section is, especially if you listen to a song like Valley of the Dolls, for example, which the rhythm work and riffs in general just really pull you into the song. And yeah, again, overall, definitely one of their best albums. Now we no longer have John Arch, and enters Ray Alder with this album, No Exit. Another album that I think is one of their best. I mean, the title track is definitely really good, but you have other great songs on here like Anarchy Divine and Silent Cries. Honestly, you really can't go wrong with any of the songs on here. I wouldn't say the album's perfect, but overall, really good album, and again, definitely one of their best. And also, Ray Alder's vocal performance on this album is pretty dang good, especially when you listen to a song like Anarchy Divine and Silent Cries. But yeah, definitely one of their best, and again. Then you move on to the album that I think is maybe their best. For the longest time, it's been hard for me to pick what my favorite Fate's Warning album is, but as of now, I think it might be this album, Perfect Symmetry. To me, you get a good balance of what they've done before the album and what they would do later, or with later albums. But some of my favorites on here, Part of the Machine, which is maybe one of their best songs, I'd say. Static Acts, which is another song that I really like. And of course, you have the single Through Different Eyes, which is a more melodic song. Excuse me. But you have other great songs like At Fate's Hands, another favorite of mine on here. And I think the album ends off in a really strong note with the song Nothing Left to Say. But yeah, really good album, and honestly probably my favorite. And I also like the production on it too. Then we move on to maybe their most commercially successful album, and that is Parallels. It was produced by Terry Brown, who worked with Rush. And some of my favorites on here: Leave the Past Behind, Life in Still Water. I like Eye to Eye. Point of View is another favorite of mine on here. But yeah, a lot of really good songs on here, and definitely one of their best albums, I'd say. And yeah, you can tell with this album they were going for a more commercially or more radio friendly album. This is again definitely their most commercially successful album. The songs are not as proggy, but you still have your more technical and more proggy moments. The 11th Hour, another pretty good song on here, but yeah, definitely one of their best in my opinion. And then with this album, they do kind of repeat themselves a little bit by going in the more commercial route, and to me, not as strong as Parallels, but At the same time, I think this album does have some underrated gems on it. Like Island in the Stream, definitely one of the best songs on here. I'd say the same thing with Shelter Me, definitely an underrated song that I think is pretty dang good. Some of my favorites, or some other favorites, I really like Pale Fire and Outside Looking In. Monument is one of the fan favorites on here and definitely one of my favorites. I like Face the Fear. There are many great songs on here. I don't know if I'd go as far to say that this album is one of their best, but still overall a pretty good album that, again, has some pretty underrated gems on it. Then we move on to A Pleasant Shade of Grey. Definitely a unique album, their discography. A bit darker, has an interesting atmosphere to it, and definitely an album that'd be perfect for when you're stuck inside during a rainy day or something like that. Definitely a perfect album to listen to, but some of my favorites, I really like the album closer. I like part 2 and part 3 and part 4. But yeah, overall, definitely a unique album in their discography, and maybe an album that might not be for everybody, maybe an album that might not click for you on the first few listens, but definitely an album worth giving more and more listens to if you weren't really into it the first time, because I think this album might be one of their best. I don't know, but definitely a pretty cool concept album from them, I'd say. But next we move on to this album, Disconnected, and this album not talked about as much as some of their other albums. When it comes to rankings, this album is usually closer to the bottom, but yeah, fairly different album. It's the first album entering the 2000s, and some of my favorites on here, I like one, Pieces of Me, definitely different, but I kind of like that song. Still Remains is another highlight on here. As far as the title track or part 1 and part 2, honestly I don't listen to those a lot, but they're both decent though. But yeah, overall decent album, not one of their best, but still I'd say it has some good stuff on it though. Then we move on to the album that I think is maybe their weakest, to be honest, and that is FWX. This album does have its fans, but I think this album honestly is kind of a snoozer. When it comes to Queensryche, I think their snoozer is American Soldier. When it comes to Dream Theater, their snoozer is The Astonishing. But again, with Fate's Warning, I think their snoozer is this album. I just can never get into this album at all. I mean, the album isn't terrible. It's not god-awful. It's just, to me, not as captivating or as musically interesting as their other albums. But I do like Left Here, Simple Human. Another Perfect Day is a decent song, but honestly, this album just doesn't do a whole lot for me. But again, not terrible though. Then we move on to their comeback album, and it is Darkness in a Different Light, and this is an album that I don't return to very much. And at the same time, I don't think it's a very strong comeback album. I mean, it's a decent album, but for me, many of the songs to me are just not that memorable, or at least some of them are just not that memorable. And honestly, I like Firefly. Into the Black is a cool song, and Yet It Moves is another song that I remember liking, but honestly, this album for me just lacks replay value, and I think they would do better with their next albums. But yeah, overall, decent album, but to me, not the strongest comeback album. Next we move on to this album, Theories of Flight. When it comes to their 3 albums or their modern era, I think this album is the best of the 3. Some of my favorites, From the Rooftops. 7 Stars is a really good song, definitely a good single. The Light and Shade of Things, definitely one of the best songs of their modern era. It's one of the epics on here, and definitely one of the best songs on here, I'd say. SOS is another great song on here that was also a single. I also really like White Flag, kind of an underrated song, but yeah, I like a lot of the songs on here, and overall I think it's a strong album. Then we move on to their most recent album, Long Day Good Night. I have the limited Europe edition, but Yeah, when the album came out, it took me a little bit to figure out which album I like more, this album or Theories of Flight, but as time has gone on, I think it's safe to say that I like Theories of Flight more, but still, I think this album is pretty good. Just the thing is, I'm not sure how to feel about some of the songs with having these lengthy melodic intros or build-ups. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's kind of like, can we just get into the main part of the song, I guess. I don't know, but Destination Onward takes a little bit to get started or to get to something interesting, but still, overall, decent song. It's just, you have this long melodic or slow build-up that I think they could have trimmed a little bit, but once you get to the main part of the song, or however you want to put it, I think the song does get pretty good. Shuttered World, probably one of the best songs on here, one of the bangers, you could say. Alone We Walk is another strong song on here, I'd say. Scars, which was the first single, definitely one of the best songs in here, I'd say, and definitely a good choice for a single too. But The Longest Shadow of the Day is maybe my favorite song on here. One of the more lengthy songs on here, but man, I really like this song a lot, and also has some of my favorite riff work on the album too. But yeah, you have some other solid songs on here, like Glass Houses. Now Comes the Rain is another pretty good song on here. But yeah, there's some good stuff on here. A few skippable songs, but overall, fairly pretty good album, I'd say. Maybe not as strong as Theories of Flight, at least in my opinion, but still pretty good album. But anyways, that's my review of the Fates Warring discography. Let me know your thoughts on my review. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of my opinions or views. Let me know some of your favorite, least favorite albums or songs, their discography, and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, say a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.